To Smith, 5 minutes later, as he sat in his room smoking a cigarette and looking dreamily out at the distant hills, there entered the Honourable Frederick Threepwood, who, having closed the door behind him, tottered to the bed and uttered a deep and discordant groan. Smith, his mind thus rudely wrenched from pleasant meditations, turned and regarded the gloomy youth with disfavour. "At any other time, Comrade Threepwood," he said politely but with firmness, "certainly, but not now. I am not in the vein." "What?" said the Hon. Freddy vacantly. "I say that at any other time I should be delighted to listen to your farmyard imitations, but not now. At the moment I am deep in thoughts of my own, and I may say frankly that I regard you as more or less of an excrescence. I want solitude. Solitude. I am in a beautiful reverie, and your presence jars upon me somewhat profoundly." The Honourable Freddy ruined the symmetry of his hair by passing his fingers feverishly through it. "Don't talk so much. I never met a fellow like you for talking." Having rumpled his hair to the left, he went through it again and rumpled it to the right. "I say, do you know what? You've jolly well got to clear out of here, quick." He got up from the bed and approached the window, having done which he bent towards Smith and whispered in his ear, "The game's up." Smith withdrew his ear with a touch of hauteur, but he looked at his companion with a little more interest. He had feared, when he saw Freddy stagger in with such melodramatic despair and emit so hollow a groan, that the topic on which he wished to converse was the already exhausted one of his broken heart. Now it began to appear that weightier matters were on his mind. "I fail to understand you, Comrade Threepwood," he said. "The last time I had the privilege of conversing with you, you informed me that Susan, or whatever her name is, merely giggled and told you not to be silly when you embraced her. In other words, she is not a detective. What has happened since then to get you all worked up?" "Baxter." "What has Baxter been doing?" "Only giving the whole bally show away to me, that's all," said Freddy feverishly. He clutched Smith's arms violently, causing that exquisite to utter a slight moan and smooth out the wrinkles thus created in his sleeve. "Listen, I've been talking to the blighter. I was passing the library just now, and he popped out of the door and hauled me in, and dash it, he hadn't been talking 2 seconds before I realised that he's seen through the whole damn thing practically from the moment you got here, though he doesn't seem to know that I've anything to do with it, thank goodness." "I should imagine not, if he makes you his confidant. Why did he do that, by the way? What made him select you as the recipient of his secrets?" "As far as I can make out, his idea was to form a gang, if you know what I mean. He said a lot of stuff about him and me being the only 2 able-bodied young men in the place. We ought to be prepared to tackle you if you started anything." "Oh, I see. And now tell me, how our delightful friend ever happened to begin suspecting that I was not all I seemed to be. I had been flattering myself that I'd put the little deception over with complete success. When in the first place, dash it, that damn fellow McTodd, the real one, you know, sent a telegram saying he wasn't coming. So it seemed rummy to Baxter bang from the start when you blew in all merry and bright." "Ah, that was what they all meant by saying they were glad I had come after all. A phrase which at the moment, I confess, rather mystified me. And then you went and wrote in the Peavy Female's autograph book." "In what way was that a false move?" "Why, that was the biggest bloomer on record, as it has turned out," said Freddy vehemently. "Baxter apparently keeps every letter that comes to the place on a file, and he had skewered McTodd's original letter with the rest. I mean, the one he wrote accepting the invitation to come here, and Baxter compared his handwriting with that you wrote in the Peavy's album. Of course, they weren't a damn bit alike, and that put the lid on it." Smith lit another cigarette and drew at it thoughtfully. He realised that he had made a tactical error in underestimating the antagonism of the efficient one. "Does he seem to have any idea why I've come to the castle?" he asked. Any idea? Why, dash it, the very first thing he said to me was that you must have come to sneak Aunt Connie's necklace. In that case, why has he made no move till today? I should have supposed he would long since have denounced me before as large an audience as he could assemble. Why this reticence on the part of genial old Baxter? A crimson flush of chivalrous indignation spread itself over Freddie's face. He told me that, too. There seems to have been no reserves between Comrade Baxter and yourself, and very healthy, too, this spirit of confidence. What was his reason for abstaining from loosing the bomb? He said he was pretty sure you wouldn't try to do anything on your own. He thought you would wait until your accomplice arrived. And damn him, cried Freddie heatedly, do you know who he's got the infernal gall to think is your accomplice? Miss Halliday, dash him! Psmith smoked in thoughtful silence. Well, of course, now that this has happened, said Freddie, I suppose it's no good thinking of going on with the thing. You'd better pop off, what? If I were you, I'd leg it today and have your luggage sent on after you. Psmith threw away his cigarette and stretched himself. During the last few moments, he had been thinking with some tenseness. Comrade Threepwood, he said reprovingly, you suggest a cowardly and weak-minded action. I admit that the outlook would be distinctly rosier if no such person as Baxter were on the premises, but nevertheless, the thing must be seen through to a finish. At least we have this advantage over our spectacled friend, that we know he suspects me, and he doesn't know we know. I think, with a little resource and ingenuity, we may yet win through. He turned to the window and looked out. Sad, he sighed, that these idyllic surroundings should have become oppressed with a cloud of sinister menace. One thinks one sees a fawn popping about in the undergrowth, and on looking more closely perceives that it is in reality a detective with a notebook. What one fancied was the piping of Pan turns out to be a police whistle, summoning assistance. Still, we must bear these things without wincing. They are our cross. What you have told me will render me, if possible, warier and more snake-like than ever, but my purpose remains firm. The cry goes round the castle battlements. Psmith intends to keep the old flag flying. So, charge off, soothe your quivering ganglions with a couple of aspirins, Comrade Threepwood, and leave me to my thoughts. All will doubtless come right in the future. From out of the scented shade of the big cedar on the lawn in front of the castle, Psmith looked at the flower beds, jaunty and gleaming in the afternoon sun. Then he looked back at Eve, incredulity in every feature. I must have misunderstood you, surely, he said, in a voice vibrant with reproach. You do not seriously intend to work in weather like this? I must. I've got a conscience. They aren't paying me a handsome salary, a fairly handsome salary anyway, to sit about in deck chairs. But you only came yesterday. Well, I ought to have worked yesterday. It seems to me, said Psmith, the nearest thing to slavery that I have ever struck. I had hoped, seeing that everybody had gone off and left us alone, that we were going to spend a happy and instructive afternoon together under the shade of this noble tree, talking of this and that. Is it not to be? No, it's not. It's lucky you're not the one who's supposed to be cataloguing this library. You'd never get finished. And why, as your employer would say, should it? He has expressed the opinion several times in my hearing that the library has jogged along quite comfortably for a great number of years without being catalogued. Why shouldn't it go on like that indefinitely? It's no good trying to tempt me. There's nothing I would like better than to loaf here for hours and hours. But what would Mr. Baxter say when he got back and found out? It is becoming increasingly clear to me each day that I stay in this place, said Psmith moodily, that Comrade Baxter is a little short of a blister on the community. Tell me, how do you get on with him? I don't like him much. Nor do I. It's on these communities of taste that lifelong attachments are built. Sit down. Let us exchange confidences on the subject of Baxter. Eve laughed. I won't. You're simply trying to lure me into staying out here and neglecting my duty. I really must be off now. You have no idea what a lot of work there is to be done. You are entirely spoiling my afternoon. No, I'm not. You've got a book. What is it? Smith picked up the brightly jacketed volume and glanced at it. The Man with the Missing Toe. Comrade Threepwood lent it to me. He has a vast store of this type of narrative. I expect he'll be wanting you to catalogue his library next. Well, it looks interesting. Ah, but what does it teach? How long do you propose to shut yourself up in that evil-smelling library? An hour or so. Then I shall rely on your society at the end of that period. We might go for another saunter on the lake. All right, I'll come and find you when I've finished. Smith watched her disappear into the house, then seated himself once more in the long chair under the cedar. A sense of loneliness oppressed him. He gave one look at the Man with the Missing Toe, and having rejected the entertainment it offered, gave himself up to meditation. Blanding's castle dozed in the midsummer heat like a palace of sleep. There had been an exodus of its inmates shortly after lunch, when Lord Emsworth, Lady Constance, Mr. Keble, Miss Peavy, and the efficient Baxter had left for the neighbouring town of Bridgeford in the big car, with the Honourable Freddie puffing in its wake in a natty two-seater. Smith, who had been invited to accompany them, had declined on the plea that he wished to write a poem. He felt but a tepid interest in the afternoon's programme, which was to consist of the unveiling by his lordship of the recently completed memorial to the late Hartley Reddish, Esquire, J.P., for so many years Member of Parliament for the Bridgeford and Shifley division of Shropshire. Not even the prospect of hearing Lord Emsworth, clad, not without vain protest and weak grumbling, in a silk hat, morning coat and sponge-bag trousers, deliver a speech, had been sufficient to lure him from the castle grounds. But at the moment when he had uttered his refusal, thereby incurring the ill-concealed envy both of Lord Emsworth and his son Freddie, the latter also an unwilling celebrant, he had supposed that his solitude would be shared by Eve. This deplorable conscientiousness of hers, this morbid craving for work, had left him at a loose end. The time and the place were above criticism, but, as so often happens in this life of ours, he had been let down by the girl. But though he chafed for a while, it was not long before the dreamy peace of the afternoon began to exercise a soothing effect upon him. With the exception of the bees that worked with their usual misguided energy among the flowers, and an occasional butterfly which flitted past in the sunshine, all nature seemed to be taking a siesta. Somewhere out of sight, a lawn-mower had begun to emphasize the stillness with its musical whir. A telegraph boy on a red bicycle passed up the drive to the front door, and seemed to have some difficulty in establishing communication with the domestic staff, from which Smith deduced that Beach, the butler, like a good opportunist, was taking advantage of the absence of authority to enjoy a nap in some distant lair of his own. Eventually a parlour-maid appeared, accepted the telegram, and, apparently, a rebuke from the boy, and the bicycle passed out of sight, leaving silence and peace once more. The noblest of minds are not proof against atmospheric conditions of this kind. Smith's eyes closed, opened, closed again, and presently his regular breathing, varied by an occasional snore, was added to the rest of the small sounds of the summer afternoon. The shadow of the cedar was appreciably longer when he awoke, with that sudden start which generally terminates sleep in a garden chair. A glance at his watch told him that it was close on 5 o'clock, a fact that was confirmed a moment later by the arrival of the parlour-maid, who had answered the summons of the telegraph boy. She appeared to be the sole survivor of the little world that had at its centre in the servants' hall. a sort of female Casabianca. "I've put your tea in the hall, sir." "You could have performed no nobler or more charitable task," Psmith assured her, and having corrected a certain stiffness of limb by means of massage, went in. It occurred to him that Eve, assiduous worker though she was, might have knocked off in order to keep him company. The hope proved vain. A single cup stood bleakly on the tray. Either Eve was superior to the feminine passion for tea, or she was having hers up in the library. Filled with something of the sadness which he had felt at the sight of the toiling bees, Psmith embarked on his solitary meal, wondering sorrowfully at the perverseness which made girls work when there was no one to watch them. It was very agreeable here in the coolness of the hall. The great door of the castle was open, and through it he had a view of lawns bathed in a thirst-provoking sunlight. Through the green baize door to his left, which led to the servants' quarters, an occasional sharp giggle gave evidence of the presence of humanity. But apart from that, he might have been alone in the world. Once again he fell into a dreamy meditation, and there's little reason to doubt that he would shortly have disgraced himself by falling asleep for the second time in a single afternoon, when he was restored to alertness by the sudden appearance of a foreign body in the open doorway. Against the background of golden light, a black figure had abruptly manifested itself. The sharp pang of apprehension, which ran through Smith's consciousness like an electric shock, caused him to stiffen, like some wild creature surprised in the woods. It was due to the momentary belief that the newcomer was the local vicar, of whose conversational powers he had had experience on the second day of his visit. Another glance showed him that he had been too pessimistic. This was not the vicar. It was someone whom he had never seen before. A slim and graceful young man, with a dark and intelligent face, who stood blinking in the subdued light of the hall, with eyes not yet accustomed to the absence of strong sunshine. Greatly relieved, Psmith rose and approached him. "Hello," said the newcomer. "I didn't see you. It's quite dark in here after outside." "The light is pleasantly dim," agreed Smith. "Is Lord Emsworth anywhere about?" "I fear not. He's legged it, accompanied by the entire household, to superintend the unveiling of a memorial at Bridgeford to, if my memory serves me right, to the late Hartley Reddish Esquire, J.P. M.P. Is there anything I can do for you?" "Well, I've come to stay, you know." "Indeed?" "Lady Constance invited me to pay a visit as soon as I reached England." "Ah, then you have come from foreign parts." "Canada." Smith started slightly. This, he perceived, was going to complicate matters. The last thing he desired was the addition to the Blanding circle of one familiar with Canada. Nothing would militate against his peace of mind more than the society of a man who'd want to exchange with him views on that growing country. "Oh, Canada," he said. "I wired," proceeded the other, "but I suppose it came after everybody had left. Ah, that must be my telegram on that table over there. I walked up from the station." He was rambling idly about the hall, after the fashion of one breaking new ground. He paused at an occasional table, the one where, when taking after-dinner coffee, Miss Peavy was wont to sit. He picked up a book and uttered a gratified laugh. "One of my little things," he said. "One of what?" said Smith. "This book, Songs of Squalor. I wrote it." "You wrote it?" "Yes, my name's McTodd, Ralston McTodd. I expect you've heard them speak of me." The mind of a man who has undertaken a mission as delicate as Smith's at Blandings Castle is necessarily alert. Ever since he had stepped into the 5 o'clock train at Paddington, when his adventure might have been said formally to have started, Smith had walked warily, like one in a jungle on whom sudden and unexpected things might pounce out at any moment. This calm announcement from the slim young man, therefore, though it undoubtedly startled him, did not deprive him of his faculties. On the contrary, it quickened them. His first action was to step nimbly to the table on which the telegram lay waiting the return of Lord Emsworth. His second was to slip the envelope into his pocket. It was imperative that telegrams signed MacTodd should not lie about loose while he was enjoying the hospitality of the castle. This done, he confronted the young man. "Come, come," he said with quiet severity. He was extremely grateful to a kindly providence which had arranged that this interview should take place at a time when nobody but himself was in the house. "You say that you are Ralston MacTodd, the author of these poems?" "Yes, I do." "Then what," said Psmith incisively, "is a pale parabola of joy?" What?" said the newcomer in an enfeebled voice. There was manifest in his demeanour now a marked nervousness. "And here's another," said Psmith. Wait a minute, I'll get it soon. Yes, the sibilant, scented silence that shimmered where we sat. Could you oblige me with a diagram of that one?" What are you talking about?" Psmith stretched out a long arm and patted him almost affectionately on the shoulder. "It's lucky you met me before you had to face the others," he said. "I fear that you undertook this little venture without thoroughly equipping yourself. They would have detected your imposture in the first minute." "What do you mean, imposture? I don't know what you're talking about." Psmith waggled his forefinger at him reproachfully. "My dear comrade, I may as well tell you at once that the genuine MacTodd is an old and dear friend of mine. I had a long and entertaining conversation with him only a few days ago, so that I think we may confidently assert, and that is that. Or am I wrong?" "Oh, hell," said the young man, and flopping bonelessly into a chair, he mopped his forehead in undisguised and abject collapse. Silence reigned for a while. "What?" inquired the visitor, raising a damp face that shone pallidly in the dim light. "Are you going to do about it?" "Nothing, comrade. By the way, what is your name?" "Coots." "Nothing, comrade Coots. Nothing whatever. You are free to leg it hence whenever you feel disposed. In fact, the sooner you do so, the better I shall be pleased." "Say, that's darn good of you." "Not at all, not at all." "You're an ace." "Oh, hush," interrupted Psmith modestly. "But before you go, tell me one or two things. I take it that your object in coming here was to have a pop at Lady Constance's necklace?" "Yes." "I thought as much. And what made you suppose that the real MacTodd would not be here when you arrived?" "Oh, that was all right. I travelled over with that guy MacTodd on the boat. Saw a good deal of him when we were in London. He was full of how he had been invited here, and I got it out of him that no one here knew him by sight. And then one afternoon I met him in the Strand, all worked up, madder than a hornet. Said he'd been insulted and wouldn't come down to this place if they came and begged him on their bended knees. I couldn't make out what it was all about, but apparently he had met Lord Emsworth and hadn't been treated right. He told me he was going straight off to Paris." "And did he?" "Sure, I saw him off myself at Charing Cross. That's why it seems such a cinch coming here instead of him. It's just my darned luck that the first man I run into is a friend of his. How was I to know that he had any friends on this side? He told me he'd never been in England before." "It's this life, Comrade Coots," said Psmith. "We must always distinguish between the unlikely and the impossible. It was unlikely, as you say, that you would meet any friend of MacTodd's in this out-of-the-way spot, and you rashly ordered your movements on the assumption that it was impossible. With what result? The cry goes round the underworld, 'Poor old Coots has made a bloomer.' You needn't rub it in. I'm only doing so for your own good. It is my earnest hope that you will lay this lesson to heart and profit by it. Who knows that it may not be the turning point in your career? Years hence, when you are a white-haired and opulent man of leisure, having retired from the crook business with a comfortable fortune, you may look back on your experience of today and realise that it was the means of starting you on the road to success. You'll lay stress on it when you're interviewed for the Weekly Burglar on How I Began. But talking of starting on roads, I think that perhaps it would be as well if you now had a dash at the one leading to the railway station. The household may be returning at any moment now. That's right, agreed the visitor. I think so, said Smith. I think so. You'll be happier when you are away from here. Once outside the castle precincts, a great weight will roll off your mind. A little fresh air will put roses in your cheeks. You know your way out? He shepherded the young man to the door, with a cordial push, started him on his way. Then with long strides, he ran upstairs to the library to find Eve. At about the same moment, on the platform of Market Blandings Station, Miss Aileen Peavy was alighting from the train which had left Bridgeford some half an hour earlier. A headache, the fruit of standing about in the hot sun, had caused her to forego the pleasure of hearing Lord Emsworth deliver his speech, and she had slipped back on a convenient train with the intention of lying down and resting. Finding on reaching Market Blandings that her head was much better, and the heat of the afternoon being now over, she started to walk to the castle, greatly refreshed by a cool breeze which had sprung up from the west. She left the town from almost the exact time when the disconsolate Mr. Coutts was passing out of the big gates at the end of the castle drive.